Hi, my name's Heather O'Neill, and this is my presentation on FERPA and its latest changes. Have you ever heard of the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act? Well, that's FERPA. What is FERPA? Under federal law, it protects the confidentiality of student education records. It is found under Title 20 in the United States Code, and the regulations are found in Title 34. FERPA is best known for laws governing student privacy. FERPA enforcement comes from the U.S. Department of Education. It has recently had some changes after No Child Left Behind and the USA Patriot Act. FERPA also gives adults and students who are age 18 or attending secondary school the rights to the privacy of student education records. What does the law provide? Well, it's the right of parents and adult-age students to inspect and receive student records, the right to deny others access, specifically a person outside the school system, with some exceptions. There's a process and order to correct errors. They have the right to opt out of military recruitment and the right to opt out of student directory information. What FERPA does not do, it does not give individuals the right to sue the school. Only the U.S. Department of Education can sanction schools for violations. All schools that receive funds from the U.S. Department of Education must comply with FERPA. That includes colleges and universities whose students receive financial assistance from the federal government, private or public. And here are the 6 federal laws that govern the privacy of education records. That includes the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, Protection of Pupils' Rights Amendments, No Child Left Behind, the Patriot Act, the Privacy Act of 1974, and Campus Sex Crimes Prevention Act. What are educational records? Educational records are records that are directly related to a student. The records are maintained by the school or by a third-party vendor on behalf of the school. FERPA prohibits the release of education records without consent of parent or adult-age student. What is educational record information? That's information that's the student grades and disciplinary records, student progress reports and grade point average, academic or physical testing results, and attendance records. So what's not part of the education record? That includes private records a teacher makes during the course of teaching, law enforcement or campus security records maintained solely for law enforcement reasons, employment records and alumni records, or grades on peer-graded papers before they're recorded. So how does FERPA work with SROs or school resource officers and immigration? Usually, school resource officers are not required to report undocumented students, but there is a limited exception that can apply if the SRO is employed by your district through the county and public safety concerns do exist. So how does FERPA and the digital age work? How do you, as a K-12 school, stay compliant? Well, your privacy regulations should match school needs. Schools should be thinking about the information they're keeping and how long should they keep it? And who are they allowing to access this information? Schools need to be aware of the contracts in place and ensure vendors are doing what they say they will do and not do with student data. And companies providing surveillance cameras and software must abide by the same laws as schools when protecting student data. So the Educational Department guide on FERPA gave a few tips. So school officials, parents, educators, and law enforcement officers were unclear about the laws and requirements and exceptions. So contrary to common misconception, schools do have a great deal of flexibility under FERPA to disclose students' data and education records in certain settings. When it comes to school safety, FERPA makes an exception to its restrictions on data sharing if knowledge of information is necessary to protect the safety of students in an emergency. Can schools disclose information to other schools? Absolutely, yes they can. Schools can disclose education records without appropriate consent to another school in which a student seeks or intends to enroll. Schools must also disclose records to the juvenile justice facility that is considered a school. So what are some unintentional ways that FERPA might be violated? Well, think about this. If you need to get rid of old records, don't just put them in the trash. They must be shredded first. Be sure you know what your vendors are doing with your data. The vendor may intentionally or accidentally misuse students' education records, but the school will still be at fault. And be clear with the vendor that the data belongs to the school, not the vendor. If the school denies access to student records to a parent of a student under the age of 18, that's a Ferpa violation. If a teacher is a witness to an incident, they are free to talk about it. But if an administrator reads about that incident, they are not free to talk about it publicly. And be aware of social media. One comment can go to thousands of people. So what about Ferpa and security cameras? What's legal and what's not? Parent access to security camera recordings. When a recording qualifies as an educational record and is maintained by the educational institution, it must be disclosed to parents. So what about law enforcement access to security camera footage? Well, unless recordings are created and maintained by a school's law enforcement unit, it does not qualify as Ferpa protected. Schools are prohibited from disclosing the recording without parent consent. So, bottom line is that administrators should consider the following steps when dealing with security cameras and surveillance. Think about installing cameras, right? Why are you installing the cameras? Developing policies to cover those cameras and why they're in place, deciding on the purpose of the cameras, notify the community of policies, handbooks, and websites, establish protocols, and consult the Family Policy Compliance Office. So, a guide for parents and adult-age students. A few tips are, a few questions are, who has access to educational records? The law is clear on who may access records without parental consent. A parent may request records not be released, but the school can deny or approve that request. So as a parent, how can I find out if records have been requested? Each educational agency must maintain an access log. It lists all individuals who have accessed or requested student records. And what if my Ferpa rights are violated? The only option to parents is to file a complaint with the Family Policy Compliance Office of the U.S. Department of Education. So how does the data need to be taken care of? So data destruction. Ferpa does not require educational agencies and institutions to destroy records maintained as part of regular school or agency operations. For student records, many times schools create their own record retention policies to state how long they're going to keep them and how they're going to destroy them. PII from education records must be destroyed, though, when no longer needed for a specific purpose. And modern electronic data is really hard to get rid of. It's highly advanced and it's extremely resilient. It's difficult to permanently get rid of that data. So the choice of destruction method depends on the risk posed by the sensitive nature of the data. So what are some ways that you can ensure your school stays compliant? Number one, raise Ferpa awareness. By talking about it and making people aware, they're definitely more vigilant. So, number two, confirm that Ferpa applies to you. Number three, know the rights, protections, and exceptions. Number four, choose compliant vendors. Number five, train all school employees. Number six, implement compliant policies and procedures. Number seven, encrypt files and emails. And number eight, implement other prevention tools. So how does Ferpa apply to us in Oskaloosa? Well, a few bullet points I pulled from the board manual is the district shall annually provide parents notice of their rights under the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment and the Student Data Privacy Act at the beginning of each school year and any time there is a substantial change. Student data restrictions is any student data submitted to and maintained by a statewide student data system and shall only be disclosed in accordance with the Student Data Privacy Act. Disclosure of all student data or student record information maintained is governed by the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, also known as FERPA. Student data may be disclosed to the authorized personnel of an educational agency or state board of regents who require disclosures to perform assigned duties, and the student and the parent or legal guardian of the student, provided the data pertains solely to the student. So in our district, we also use biometrics for signing the students in at lunchtime. So we have a statement on biometric data. The district shall not collect biometric data from a student or use any device or mechanism to assess a student's physiological or emotional state unless the student or parent or legal guardian of the minor student consents in writing. Biometric data includes measurable, biological, or behavior. So nothing in this policy shall prohibit the collection of audio, voice recordings, facial expression information, and student handwriting for provision of counseling or psychological services, conducting student threat assessments, completing student disciplinary investigations or hearings, or conducting child abuse investigations. Student data security breach. If this happens, is a security breach or unauthorized disclosure of student data or personally identifiable information, or PII, of any student submitted to or maintained on a statewide student longitudinal data system. Each affected student or the parent or legal guardian of the student, if a minor, shall be immediately notified, and an investigation into the causes and consequences of the breach or unauthorized disclosure will be conducted. So I know that was a lot to take in. I hope that gave you a better understanding of FERPA and how it applies to us in Oskaloosa. Here are my resources. And good luck staying FERPA compliant. Thank you.